Hello everyone, you're watching Let's Talk About Prepping. I'm Tyler, your host, and in this video we're looking at the documents behind the Homeland Security Report, Surviving a Catastrophic Power Outage. If you watch other prepping channels, you probably already heard about this Department of Homeland Security study on the impacts that a 6-month power outage would have on the nation and what we can do to prepare for it. This is trending recently because of a Washington Examiner article which looks at the study, which was recently submitted to the President by the Department of Homeland Security. The Washington Examiner article mostly focuses on the individual recommendations made by the study, such as the change from the government-suggested 3-day preparation window to a 14-day preparation window for individuals. But the 94-page study has a lot of different recommendations to the President from the individual to the national infrastructure level. The report was submitted to the Secretary of Homeland Security by the President's National Infrastructure Advisory Council. This advisory council is a working group which was put together in the wake of 9/11 to look at the weakness of the national infrastructure to terrorist activity. The 94-page report has a variety of recommendations made to the President on what can be done to prepare against an extended power outage. The working group's members consist of a variety of high-ranking professionals from relevant government and industry positions. The first part of the 94-page report is mostly introductory and contains some overview of the information within. The second part is the one that we're most interested in and contains the recommendations and findings of the report. The last and largest section mostly contains appendices and supporting information found during the fact-gathering part of the study. The first recommendation involves identifying what government authorities should be exercised during such an event, and what high-level government officials are responsible for what decision-making processes during an extended power outage situation. The second recommendation involves identifying what is needed by cities, rural areas, and infrastructure sectors in order to reduce the impact upon them from an extended power outage situation, and to be able to respond to such a situation. The third recommendation involves providing guidance and resources for states, cities, and localities to design community enclaves, essentially areas that are designed to weather such events and be prepared to provide services and resources to surrounding populations. This sort of dispels the notion that there will be global anarchy or sort of a Mad Max type situation immediately after an outage of this type. FEMA camps and conspiracy theories aside, if you look at history, it is definitely true that no matter how interested a government is in its own survival, that survival relies on the population and industry in the long term, and any government interested in providing for its own long-term survival needs to be interested in the well-being and survivability of its population. And what this section shows us is that the government is taking proactive steps to ensure that critical areas of the country will be provided for in the case of an extended power outage. Now, this definitely doesn't equate to providing universally for all of the population, and that's something that we're going to look at in just a minute, so hold on. The next recommendation involves providing a portfolio of incentives that provide financial support or remove barriers and to help companies and non-government organizations and state, local, and tribal governments to implement the recommendations included in this report. What that means is that the government may implement programs to pay back companies for the costs to harden the grid, or provide liability to power companies and governments for things that they might need to do in the event of a catastrophic power outage. Now, what this means is that in certain situations, if they prioritize certain parts of the grid, like industry sectors, over other parts of the grid, like rural areas, and if that potentially causes loss of life due to the failure of the power grid in those rural areas, there will be legal protection provided to those localities and those companies and the individuals who have to make the decision and throw that switch if those decisions are seen as necessary from the national security perspective, but are detrimental to individual life. So essentially, while this report is acknowledging that the government needs to do things to provide for its citizens and help them to prepare for themselves, it is also acknowledging that in the case of such an event, hard decisions have to be made. And even in the report's wording itself, says this will produce have and have-nots, and liability protection must be provided to the ones implementing these procedures. Recommendation 5 involves conducting a series of exercises and simulations of power outage events in order to identify their impacts on secondary and tertiary systems. This is acknowledging that there will be a cascading ripple of effects from the initial power outage, For instance, the production of fertilizer and other things necessary to life, and fuel production, which is also necessary for other means of energy production, as the next recommendation is going to look at. Recommendation 6 looks at the fact that critical natural gas production and transportation infrastructure currently relies on the existing electric grid, and that it is necessary to be able to produce, transport, and produce electricity using natural gas without existing electric grid. This is called black start generation and involves being able to produce some electricity with no electricity, because many forms of electric production require a baseline of starting electricity, and natural gas is one of the only ways that we'll be able to produce this, but the infrastructure isn't there for that yet. The final recommendation involves providing a flexible and adaptable emergency communication system that can be used by all sectors, like energy, emergency response, and government, in order to respond to such an event, and that this system needs to be self-powered and self-contained and reasonably protected against the hazards that would come along with the various power outage events that we're talking about. So as you can see from this brief breakdown, there's a lot more to this report than just a suggestion to the president that people need to be more prepared and have more food. This is a very detailed breakdown from the top-down government level look at what needs to be done at a national level to prepare for such an event. It's an acknowledgement that nothing can truly be done to protect the grid from such an event, and that nothing can truly be done in the event from a national level, and that breakdown will occur, and that degradation of a system will occur, and that local and regional systems need to be put in place to respond to such an event, and that a cultural shift, in the words of this report, needs to be seen in order to get people to realize that personal preparation is necessary. And this is an acknowledgement that the government will not be able to be there in that first weeks of an event like this to help you, because at multiple parts of the report it says that there is a misconception that these threats are less of a threat than they really are. Now, this has just been a very brief look at this report, and I really suggest that you go and check it out, because there's a lot of eye-opening information contained in it. I'll put a link in the description below. This report really validates a lot of things that we preppers have said for quite a while, but it's also a very good insight into where the government is in regards to this threat. I think it's very interesting that the report talks about the need for a cultural shift towards emergency preparedness being a more common thing in our society, and the fact that everybody needs to be more prepared to shelter in place and to be prepared to provide for themselves for a longer period of time. I think that those are some of the most key aspects of this report. This is the foothold that could be used to help legitimize emergency preparedness and take it out of the realm of doomsday prepping and into the realm of something like taxes and car insurance that everybody thinks is just something you should be doing if you're keeping your life together. Anyways, I hope that this was an insightful look at something that's been talked about lately and help reveal some of the deeper parts and details of this report, which should definitely be more than just a little blip in the prepper news cycle. Anyways, please share your thoughts on this in the comments down below, and thanks for watching. Stay tuned for future videos from Let's Talk About Prepping, and stay safe out there, everyone.